Welcome to video lesson number 7 in 215, Advanced Behavior Management and Programming. And in this particular video, we're going to talk about another type of pervasive approach or set of pervasive approaches. And they're all about adjusting lifestyle, which is a pretty big thing. What we really mean here is taking a look at the activities people do, the way that their schedules are set up. And in a subsequent video, we're going to even look at social life as part of this part of things. So there's a lot that can be different here, a lot that matters. In a simplistic way, I would say to you that chances are your schedule is very different and your activities and lifestyle are very different than other people in your life. And the happier you are with it, I'm guessing the better your behavior. The more that you have to do stuff you don't like having to do, like for example, unpleasant errands or homework, the more that you probably end up with challenging behaviors. Things like trying to get other people to do them, turning into arguments, or procrastinating. It's a very relatable thing when you stop and think about it. The more that your schedule and activities fit you, more likely that your needs are being met, and therefore that you are less likely to use these sort of challenging or dysfunctional behaviors. There are many ways that we personalize our lifestyle. For example, you hear people say all the time, I'm a morning person, or I'm a nighttime person, or I like to spend a lot of time alone, or I like to keep busy, or I'm really a family person, or I have to be outdoors and in nature if I'm going to be happy. So it's very, very important that we sit back and try to assess what works best for people, recognizing that this often is an ongoing process of reviewing, revising, and adjusting. It doesn't always work out smoothly. Sometimes we find out the hard way that people don't like certain things because of the communication challenges that we experience. But we should constantly be looking at what's working for people and trying to find a fit and avoiding doing that one-size-fits-all sort of thing. I'd like to ask you to take a moment, whether you pause the video and blog or do it separately another time, to stop and think about all the things that are unique about the way you live your life that might suddenly disappear if you became injured or experienced some kind of brain injury and had to have other people suddenly try to guess at what you like to do, when you like to do it, how often you like to do it, and the things that you really, really, really don't like doing. I'm guessing there's a lot. One of the things I want us to think about is that as CSWs or even EAs, we're always focused on people learning or doing it the right way. My experience is that that's a trap. And I can tell you right now that it's a pretty automatic thing, that if people are doing, they're going to be developing, they're going to be learning. And more importantly, they're going to be valuing what they're doing, which will even continue that process. But you can draw the joy right out of something by trying to make people have to do it or have to do it by a certain schedule or a certain way. Focusing too much on getting it right, focusing too much on getting an exact amount of time or an exact number of questions is going to create challenges. I really encourage you to step back and see whether the person is getting the essence, whether they're participating. And I like to tell a little story here. Years ago, I would take a group of people to a local bowling alley every Tuesday afternoon, and we would all bowl. There was one individual in our group that did not bowl. He never wanted to bowl. And we would always encourage him to bowl. We never forced him. We didn't get into any kind of conflict, but we would always ask him to bowl. And after doing this for about 5 or 6 weeks, it was pointed out to me that really the individual was getting all of the same benefits out of going with us to bowling that he would have gotten if he'd actually bowled. And in fact, he was probably getting more exercise because he would jump up and cheer and celebrate every time somebody did something well. He was incredibly active while we were doing this. So he was doing what he liked. He was having fun, which was one of the main purposes of us being there. He was getting exercise. And he was not getting better at bowling, but nobody cared. And on top of everything else, he was the one guy who wasn't paying to do it. So we stepped back and we stopped trying encouraging him from bowling because we just didn't need to. Participating in his own way was fine, and trying to shape it more than that was likely to just create conflict. It's important for us to include meaningful choices for people throughout the day. I spoke about this earlier in another video. We talked about yes means yes and no means no at that time, and really important for you to go back and understand that if you don't remember it. Including meaningful choices simply means that we don't just offer people choices that really don't matter. Even the most intellectually disabled person, in my experience, can tell when they have weighty or juicy decisions in their lives. They can be small, but they probably still matter. For example, I bet you care what you eat for supper every night. I bet you care whether or not you get to sit in a particular seat when you go on an airplane. These are little things, but they're important things. And the more of them that we make, the more we exercise our decision-making muscles, and we become more comfortable when bigger decisions are handed to us. We also have less reason to be in combative relationships where we're fighting to prove that we have power. So giving people lots of meaningful choices throughout the day is important. Stop and think about what matters to that person, because it isn't going to be the same in every instance. I've worked with people who really cared what vehicle they went in. I've worked with people who really cared what staff person went with them or what other participants went with them. I've worked with people who really cared about whether they got to bring a snack or go to a certain restaurant. It really is about finding out what matters to that person. And the more that you're handing over those choices to people, as a general rule, the better off things will be. Address the busyness of a person. Notice this isn't busyness, it's busyness. Some people really like a lot of busyness, and they become bored without it. And in the face of that boredom, there's an old expression, idle hands do the devil's dirty work. And for some people, that's true, that when they get bored, they start getting into mischief or they start getting into conflict. So they need a bit more busyness. Others need to have moments of downtime or a slower and more manageable amount of input. It really is, again, about getting to know the individual by observing them, speaking to them, seeing what has happened and worked in the past, speaking to other stakeholders, and considering their diagnosis. Things like offering free time to people throughout the day can really matter, but how much and when you give it is really going to matter with that individual. Some people will be bored after 5 minutes. Some people will need half an hour at a time. I once worked with a man who had Tourette syndrome, and many of his behaviors turned out to be complex tics. And one of the things we realized is if we built in 2 times a day where he could go and spend 20 minutes alone in an area where he could just kind of let it all out, all that tic energy, and he would jump up and down and make noises for about 20 minutes, that he would be so much more relaxed for the next 3 or 4 hours. And so building in those moments became a big part of his behavioral success. Consider leisure time options. I'd like you to pause and reflect for a moment on some of the things that are around your home and that you use when you have free time. Think about it and make a list of all the different things that you use in your home when you have downtime. Hopefully you've come up with a list, and some of the things that might be on that list might include books, games, electronic technology, gardening supplies, art supplies, pets, other people or contact information for reaching other people, food, beverages, things like hot tubs, outdoor spaces, napping spaces, your car, sports equipment, and even tools for doing yard work and chores. Many of you, I'm guessing, go and do some straightening up and cleaning when the time comes. And I'm sure I did not capture all of them. Hobby supplies would be another list of things. Well, in many of the homes or programs where I've worked, the only things that people had access to were usually a window or a television set. And you'll notice I didn't list either one of those in my list. Those are probably things that matter to you. But I'm guessing that if you had a steady diet of those 2 things, you'd start to feel cabin fever pretty quickly. And as a result, your behavior would start to be kind of challenging to other people. Giving people lots of ways to fend off boredom is important. And going back to something we learned earlier, teaching people to have volition or assertiveness, teaching them that they can go to the book cupboard or go to the game shelf or turn on the TV or turn on the computer or call the dog or make a snack. These are things that will go a long way to helping people to be less prompt dependent or dependent on you, and again, to have fewer behavioral problems. Something I spoke about quite a bit earlier in the module or on the video about prevention is the ability to make sure that we don't get people completely used to schedules that are rigid or routine. It's incredibly important for people to have some expectation of variety in their life. And so what I usually would do is literally schedule unpredictable times. So for example, we would have tourist in our own town day in one of our programs. And all our individuals knew is that when they showed up on Monday, we were going to plan some kind of adventure together, and it would be different every Monday. Now on Tuesday mornings, we would go and do some of the same things every week. And on Friday mornings, we do the same things every week. But there were times in our schedule that it was blocked off to be unscheduled or unpredictable. Too much of that would have been overwhelming for people, but a little bit of it helped them to develop that ability to cope with the unknown or with the unpredictable. And you'll have to adjust that based on the individuals you're supporting. The Primact Principle is one that you would have read about in your greenish-blue book. The Primact Principle simply says that we are more likely to do a less preferred activity if it is followed by a more preferred activity. An example of this is a child is more likely to do his math worksheet if he knows he gets to go out and play on the playground afterwards. So the Primact Principle is a really smart idea to think about as you're scheduling. But every person's a little bit different, and I've seen variations on it. Some people need to have an alternating schedule of less preferred activities followed by more preferred activities, and then they kind of reset. So that can work for some people. Others need the schedule to be set up so that the least fun thing is at the beginning of the day when they're sort of most together. And gradually, as the day progresses, you move more and more and more through a progression of things that they like, so that at the end of the day, the least demanding and most fun activity is finally achieved. And you work with people who, believe it or not, need to have a little bit of fun before they get started. And this flies in the face of the Primact Principle. The idea that we need to have some kind of recreational activity, have our dessert essentially before we have our entree. But we often do this in our real lives. We actually do have a little appetizer or amuse-bouche. And so I would say it's not completely incompatible with the Primact Principle to start off your days or your activities with something a little fun. A really basic format that I like to do is start off with a little bit of fun, do something that's less fun and more demanding, have fun, and keep on going in that same order. And as the day progresses, what you'll often notice is the amount of work you can do tends to get shorter, and the amount of fun that people need to have or break people need to have tends to get a little longer. And then the next day you start it over. So you want to plan the things that are most intensive early in the day and have lots of fun things after a person has worked for a while. And remember, your increments aren't what we're thinking about. You might be a put your head down and get it all ground out kind of a person, but most of the people you're supporting won't be like that. They will not have a high tolerance for working for a long period of time on things, especially when you're dealing with young children, even if they don't have developmental delays. Continuing, one of the most basic things we need to remember in this category is the need to inform participants in advance of what's coming. And I really like to use visual schedules. Sometimes they're big laminated piece of poster board with Velcro on them so that a person can just put pictures or words on them that show what they're going to do. Sometimes they use their augmentative communication device and they put it out using PEX cards on the top of a binder, or they type it into their iPad. And in some cases, people can't handle having the whole day laid out for them. It's too much information, or anticipating something that's far away can be too much stress. So there's been people I've worked with who could only have the morning scheduled, and in a few cases, people who could only know 2 things at a time. So they always wanted to know what they're doing now and immediately what was next. So when we finished an activity, we would move on to the next activity, and as we did that, we would tell them what came next. Again, this takes a degree of assessment and individualization. It's also important to understand the best delivery format. Some people liked to write out their schedule. Some people liked to use laminated cards with pictures or symbols on them. And others that we worked with really did best when we took photographs of them doing the activities and turned those photographs into the cards that they then posted on their schedules, again using paper clips or Velcro or little pouches. And it was often a really good idea to post the calendar or the schedule where a person could readily go and check on it or see it throughout the day. And we would sometimes go back and revisit it multiple times throughout the day. One of the things that we did for some people was have a space on that calendar or that schedule where they had choices, an envelope or a spot or a box where there were pictures that were Velcroed. And if a person got to make a choice, the preferred item went onto the calendar and the less preferred item went back into the envelope or into this squared off area, the parking lot. And if the person changed their mind, it was as simple as taking the item from the parking lot and putting it on the calendar and switching it out. So this is a really cool way of giving people choices, even if they're nonverbal, and they're very, very physical and they can see it represented. So it's very concrete for people. The other thing that sometimes had to be on people's schedules, depending on their personal needs, was conversations about who was going to be with them. And sometimes we had to represent those people by pictures, even the mode of transportation. Or in some cases, people were very focused on time, and so we had to use time. Some people didn't understand time, so instead we relied upon the order of events to let people know when things were happening. Whatever your approach will be, it should be individualized, and you definitely should be using approaches that tell people what to expect in advance and that give them an opportunity to go back and revisit their calendar throughout the day. You also want to make sure that you're planning ahead with any activity that you do. Whether you're planning it for an individual that is lower in function and higher in needs, and you're doing most of the planning, or whether you're involving the person in the planning, which is a lovely way to enhance this. Either way, it's about planning ahead for the simple reason that you want to anticipate potential challenges. If you get out into the community and it starts to pour rain and you don't have something to keep that person dry, you can expect them to have a behavioral response. Similarly, if they can't get home in time, or they haven't had a snack or something to eat, or they can't find a bathroom. So planning ahead and all of that stuff really matters. And if you tell people that you're going to do something, it's really important to make sure that you follow through. If they start to think that you aren't going to honor what you tell them is on their calendar, again, you'll start to see behavioral issues. So before you go telling people that you're going to do things, make sure that they're actually going to be done. When you're setting things up, consider the dynamics of the group. Some people just don't do well with other people. Really active people tend to cause behavioral reactions from people who are slower or who are less active. People who are really quiet don't do as well around people who are really loud for the most part, and so on and so forth. The other thing is that sometimes people bring out the best in each other. I've worked with people who loved each other, and so they would often hold hands and support each other in things like going downstairs. That helped us as staff people because we had an extra helper. We had somebody else who was able to kind of keep eyes and ears on things. That made both people feel more safe and happy, and again, more behavioral results were realized. You also have to think about who, as staff people, have the best relationships, knowledge, and comfort level with a particular set of individuals, and make choices based on that. It isn't a good idea to simply say, well, this person represents more work than this person, and so I'm going to give it to somebody else to do. It really is about making it fit for that person. And you have to consider your stress level. When you're asked to take something on, often we really feel kind of pressured or obligated to say yes and to do more than is reasonable, taking out more people or going through a rushed schedule, taking out people who have complex needs or into dangerous situations. And when you know that you're going to be stressed, the arousal cycle applies to you just the same way as it applies to others. The less calm or rational you are, the more likely you're going to behave in ways that inflame people and cause behavioral problems. So don't put yourself in situations that are avoidably stressful, that you could have avoided or reduced the stress. Think about the amount of time that you're spending in activities. Again, some people do really well with longer activities, but most of the people I've supported have not. That's typical of staff more than it is of supported people. So you want to think about normally having things in shorter durations. When you're supporting people with ADHD, a note that you should think about is people with ADHD often have a far higher tolerance for switching gears and multitasking, jumping around between 2, 3, or even 4 things at one time. And if that's what's working for the person, if it's delivering results, then do that. Think about the time of the day, as we said, that would really matter to people. And think about whether or not people need breaks and so forth when you're out doing certain activities. So we talked about breaks earlier, but how do you build breaks into activities for people? Make things fun. It seems like such a simple thing, but sometimes the most drudgery of activities can be made fun. When I worked in one program, we cleaned the campus of a very large church in another community. And I thought of it as one of the most drudgery things to do. And so just out of kind of natural inclination, my staff and I used to try and be silly all the time and make it as fun as possible. Well, not only were we making it more palatable for us, but it turned out we were making it more palatable for our supported individuals. It was their favorite thing to do, even more fun than going to the bowling alley or the library or to the gym or the swimming pool or to the arcade. Those were all other choices that they had, but the thing they asked about all the time was going to the church. And why? Because we made it fun. Certain things became races, other things became games. We did some things to music. We had jokes. We stopped for Starbucks along the way. We gave people the choice to play their favorite music when we were in the van. We socially interacted in the van and chatted about things. People loved all of that stuff. And to be honest with you, I don't think they even thought of it as a job. And I also don't think they even cared about the money. I don't think some of them even knew they were making money. So it's quite possible to make it fun. We had zero issues getting people to go to their job. And it was just because we made it silly. And that was just one example. We did lots of jobs. Many of them would have been jobs that people would have thought of as being miserable. But by making it fun, we changed everything. Stay safe. And again, remember to think about not just the real safety, but the perceptions of safety for people. For example, if you're going into a park with somebody and they're afraid of dogs, think about that ahead of time. Think about how people do when they're around traffic or large crowds. I once worked with a woman who thought it was a good idea to take a group of people shopping a day before Christmas Eve for no reason in a mall. And one of the individuals got too anxious and left, and it became a huge ordeal trying to find this person on not only one of the busiest shopping nights of the year, but as it turned out, one of the foggiest times I've ever seen in my life. Everything worked out at the end, but I really had questions for the staff person about why they'd chosen to do something that really didn't need to happen under those circumstances. And make sure you have a way of communicating. Simple things like when you go out with somebody, do you divide up who's going to be responsible for overseeing subgroups within your larger group? Do you make sure that you know the contact information if you have a problem for your supervisor or for the local authorities? In our area, it's 911, but in some parts of Canada, it's not. So it's really important to make sure that you have a strategy that you agree to ahead of time for how you're going to communicate, and especially if things start to get a little bit challenging. Involve the people you support in meetings and in planning. Routine meetings every month or every week are a great idea. And a lot of times when people don't get along with each other, we think that we should keep them entirely separate. And I think that there are times when that's necessary. But first I want to try mediating and helping people to learn from those conflicts or challenges, seeing if they can work out their difficulties before we automatically decide that keeping people apart from each other is better. The more that we get people involved in the planning, the more that they're going to be invested in what you're doing, the more likely it's going to be suited to them, and the less likely you'll run into one of the most common behavior problems there is, non-compliance, when people simply say they don't want to participate. So it's not only an ethically good thing to do, but it's also an effective practice. Now, one last slide before I get you to think about this, before we get you to stop and doing some journaling. We're busy people with limited budgets, limited time, limited energy. So if we can think of activities that really do the most to enhance a person's quality of life, that we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, that's a great thing to do. And there's a name for these type of activities, super therapeutic activities, meaning they don't just have a little bit of therapeutic benefit, they attack many areas all at one time. Those areas include the person's emotional and social welfare, their physical welfare, their mental and cognitive welfare, and even their spiritual welfare. These activities, in other words, nourish the mind, the body, and the spirit. So they often get overlooked. And I'd like you to think about in your journal some ways that you might build in either activities that fit this category or that are at least similar for people that you might support. How would you help people to get spiritual need met, for example, in the area of worship or meditation? How do you help people to get out their excess energy or frustrations? What sorts of activities might a person do that are just plain silly and fun? What sorts of activities can get people out in nature? What sorts of activities can help people to explore their artistic and creative side? What sort of activities can help people to meet their sexual needs? And I don't just mean physical sort of intercourse needs. I mean things like flirtation or just feeling good about ourselves as sexual beings. And what about ways to meet our intimacy needs? Things that help us to feel close to other people or like we have a kinship. Now, I don't only want you to list these things as though there's one for each one. The bigger secret of this activity is to see if you can think of activities that tick more than one of these boxes or as many as possible at one time. For example, if I go on a picnic with my girlfriend, then when we're on the picnic, I decide that we're going to try and paint the landscape. Well, I'm meeting intimacy needs, nature needs, fun needs. Maybe I'm even getting a hike in, and I'm getting creativity needs. One thing enhanced the right way can tick a lot of boxes for people. So that's the exercise for you. See if you can identify 3, 4, 5 things that tick as many of these boxes as possible. Pause the video or end the video here, and we're going to come back and talk further about another aspect of lifestyle in the next video.